Hey everyone, today's video is actually going to be a project of mine for my English class, and I thought it'd be fun to upload to my channel. As you know, I talk about coaches all the time around here, and maybe one day far in the future, I want to be a coach in some aspect, so this research is really important to me. It involves how the NFL can get more minority coaches involved in the league. Now, before I started my research, I had never really noticed an issue with the lack of minority coaches in football. I had always looked up to Tony Dungy as a coach and a person, and despite what you think of him, Marvin Lewis, I always appreciated what he did for the Bengals. And I have also met Herm Edwards, and he approached me, and I didn't approach him, and that just shows his character. And what I'm getting at is that I never really noticed an issue, because I always felt the presence of these coaches. But once I started researching, I noticed something that not many people would notice. In the 99-year history of the NFL, there have been a total of 494 head coaches and counting. Yet only 25 of these coaches were minorities, and that makes up around 5% of NFL head coaches that have been minorities. Now this is concerning since 68% of players in the NFL are African American, and about 28% are white, with the remaining 4% being of different ethnicities entering the 2014 season. This disparity has created concerns amongst fans for the game and people in the NFL about creating a more even playing field for those in the coaching and in front office profession. Now before I dive into this, my thesis is not going to be just hire more minorities to raise the number of minorities just to make people happy. I have a different idea, and that's why I wanted to share it with you guys. And I want to say this before I start, this was not originally my idea, but I do think this would be the most efficient way to make things better for hiring decisions. Now let's backtrack to back when the NFL first began. This upcoming NFL season will be the 100th season of the NFL, but until 1979, when Tom Flores was hired, who was Hispanic, only one minority coach was hired before him, and that was all the way back in 1920 when Fritz Pollard was one of two of the first black players in the NFL. Fritz Pollard and Bobby Marshall were the two first black players in 1920. Fritz Pollard was also the coach of his team, the Akron Pros, in 1921, and was the first ever minority coach in the NFL. Now this was before teams had actual coaching staffs, and they just had player coaches. However, 6 years later in 1926, all 5 of the black players in the NFL left the league, and until 1933, the NFL had a lack of minority players. Even from 1934 through 1946, there were no black players at all. Now for what I've researched, there was no rule against them, but it was definitely an understanding that this was an unwritten rule. But in 1946, Kenny Washington, a UCLA running back, joined the league and was the first black player to rejoin the league, and he played for the Los Angeles Rams. And since then, the NFL is full of minority players, and they dominate the workforce like I mentioned at the beginning. All of this information is fantastic, but let's focus on the coaching side of things and how the coaching profession can lead to more progress. And if you are an avid NFL fan like me, or just a fan of sports, you've probably heard about the Rooney Rule in the NFL. So, what exactly is the Rooney Rule? Well, it is a rule that requires each of the 32 NFL teams to interview at least one minority candidate for all head coaching positions. The reason for this rule was to increase diversity in the NFL and coaching staffs and make sure minorities were considered for high-level positions. The rule is named after former Pittsburgh Steelers owner Dan Rooney, who advocated for the rule's creation. Dan was the chairman of the league's diversity committee, and they honored him by naming the rule after him. And the most shocking stat to me was that before the Rooney Rule existed, there were only 7 minority head coaches to ever coach in the NFL, and they were Fritz Pollard of the Akron Pros in 1921, Tom Flores of the Oakland Raiders in 1979, Art Shell of the Los Angeles Raiders in 1989, Dennis Green of the Minnesota Vikings in 1992, Ray Rhodes of the Philadelphia Eagles in 1995, Tony Dungy of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in 1996, and Herman Edwards of the New York Jets in 2001. That's it. And if that felt long, imagine if I read you the list of everyone else. This was shocking to me, and I had never known there were so little. Now compared to other leagues, the NFL is certainly behind when it comes to hiring minorities. Per the New York Law Review, compared to the NBA, around the same time the NFL created their rule, the NBA had significantly more minority coaches. By the 2000s, the NBA had 7% of coaches being minorities, and that number jumped to almost half, being 48%. So I think the only way to make a huge impact on lowering these numbers is by interviewing more minority candidates for every single position on the coaching staff before making a hire. And whether you agree with that or not, this is probably going to be the only way to speed up the process from the research I've conducted. The struggle for most minority coaches is not just getting head coaching jobs, it's getting the jobs on the more tactical and nature side of the ball, which is the offensive side. Now, in the offseason, the NFL lost half of its minority coaches this year. Hugh Jackson of the Cleveland Browns, Marvin Lewis of the Cincinnati Bengals, Vance Joseph of the Denver Broncos, Todd Bowles of the New York Jets, and Steve Wilkes of the Arizona Cardinals. Now, all of these coaches specialize on the defensive side of the ball, except for Hugh Jackson, and I do think all of these coaches had valid reasons to be fired, and all of the replacements were offensive-minded coaches who replaced defensive coaches, except except for the Denver Broncos, who hired another defensive coordinator. I, for one, would love to see more offensive-minded coaches in the NFL with solid defensive coordinators, just like what the Patriots and Rams had last year. Each team had solid offensive play and excellent defensive coaching from their coordinators. And that is something all of these teams have lacked, so they made a coaching change. And that's why I'm advocating for more change in the interview process and interviewing minorities for every single position on the coaching staff. From what I've read, minorities get stuck on the defensive side of the ball, which is great, but with the NFL changing to more offense, these coaches are getting left in the dust. Dave Campbell and Josh Dubow wrote an article for the Associated Press talking about the lack of minority coaches on the offensive side of the ball. They found only 4 minority coaches in stepping stone positions of the offensive coordinator or quarterbacks coach, and that's just 7.1% of 56 jobs. Of the 19 minority head coaches in the league since the Rooney Rule was created in 2002, 14 have had primarily defensive backgrounds. And in 2015, 17 of the 32 head coaches in the NFL came from defensive backgrounds. And this year, 20 of the 32 will be offensive-minded head coaches. So that number has completely flipped. And in 2015, 6 of the 7 new hires had defensive backgrounds, and in the 4 off-seasons since then, 21 of the 28 head coaches hired have had offensive backgrounds. So the NFL is actually leading to an offensive league to no one's surprise, and it's rapidly changing. So let's look at Anthony Lynn, the head coach of the Los Angeles Chargers, Eric Bieniemy, the offensive coordinator for the Kansas City Chiefs, and David Shaw, the head coach of Stanford University. All of them are excellent coaches and have created great teams, whether they are the head coach, the offensive coordinator, or a great college head coach. They are all great at calling plays and hiring great coaching staffs, and all of them contain offensive backgrounds. Per Cameron Wolfe of the Denver Post in 2017, 110 of the 147 offensive coordinator jobs, which was 74.8%, filled since 2007, not counting coaches hired on an interim basis, went to former NFL or college quarterbacks coaches. Of those 110 jobs, 5 went to black coaches, which is 4.5%, and 3 of those 5s went to the same black head coach, which was Hugh Jackson, the former Browns head coach. Black coaches accounted for 8 of the other 37 offensive coordinator jobs, which is 21.6%, that went to coaches without a quarterback's coach background, showing they often take a long time to get to the top. It also said in this article that the Denver Post spoke to 10 black coaches about the hiring process, and they believed NFL teams often hire white coaches when looking at the offensive coordinator position, while black coaches stand a much better chance on the defensive side of the ball, because they are viewed more favorably since they can relate to the players and provide emotional leadership, since 70% of players in the NFL are black. And this is exactly why I propose the NFL expands the rule and makes it to interview minorities for every position on the coaching staff. In 2009, the NFL required the Rooney Rule to be used for all hirings in the front office and for general managers, so the rule has been updated in the past. And another cool stat I found while researching this was the NFL now mandates that females must be interviewed for executive openings throughout the league. In reality, this upgrade to the rule could really benefit the league and create an equal opportunity for everyone involved in the NFL. And since the establishment of the Rooney Rule, 19 minority coaches have been hired as head coaches. And since the start of the 2006 season, the overall percentage of minority coaches has jumped to 22%. But the rule is still not perfect yet, and the league has issues with whether or not the rule is still effective because of recent firings and how drastic the number decreases so rapidly. Now, this could be because we are still transitioning, so it's going to take time with whether or not the rule is still effective, which is why I propose expanding the interview process. Another note I found was that teams have taken a chance on 21 first-time white head coaches and only 1 first-time minority head coach from 2012 to 2016. When Todd Bowles was hired by the Jets. And this 21-to-1 gap is identical to the numbers before the Rooney Rule was invented. So these concerns have really sparked debate on how effective the rule even is. And current Tampa Bay Buccaneers head coach Bruce Arians has advocated for the rule to include interviews for jobs as coordinators. Bruce Arians is a great coach who just wants the best candidate no matter who they are. And this year he hired 2 full-time women coaches, which is the first of its kind in the NFL. One will be an assistant strength coach and the other will be an assistant defensive line coach. So his opinion is coming from the best in the business, and I agree with his ideas. Nothing about this should be controversial though. The hiring process should and always will be about hiring the most qualified candidate to create a winning team. But changing the interview process could really help everyone get involved and create a change that many people are looking for. Now, you cannot deny the Rooney Rule has not been effective because it still had a great increase in minority coaches before the rule was created. And again, considering there were only 7 minority coaches until 2002, fluctuation is going to seem dramatic for both increases and decreases. So, to conclude, I think the NFL should change the interviewing process for all coaches, where every team has to interview a minority candidate for every coaching position on the staff. This would give equal opportunity on the offensive side of the ball, because that is the direction the NFL is heading, and that's where the minorities find it hard to get coaching positions. And this runs up to when they look for head coaching jobs, because now everyone wants offensive-minded coaches, and there just aren't that many that are minorities. I love this idea, and I think that we will at least see something like this come soon for at least the offensive and defensive coordinator positions. So thanks for watching, everyone, and let me know what you guys think in the comments, and I really appreciate you staying to the end.